Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about line types. So in this video you're going to see various types of line types that I will be creating and also identifying, and we'll talk about line weight and line size. And the purpose of line types is to communicate within a drawing what's actually taking place. So we'll speak more to that as we go in and identify each line type by definition. So first of all, let's go ahead and start with visible lines. So I'm going to go zoom in so you guys can see this better. All right, we're going to focus on visible lines. And the first thing that you see when you look at the visible line is that it's a dark line, okay? So a visible line represents, okay, so we'll go ahead and define this, represents visible edges of an object. Okay, and if you look at the line, every line that we'll create has a line weight, and so the line weight for a visible line is thick and dark. So if you think about your mechanical pencils usually are created with lead sizes of 0.5, 0.7, and 0.9. This is considered a 0.7. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and create these. If you remember when we were talking about creating horizontal lines, if you're right-handed, you start from the left and you work to the right, focusing on the endpoint. If you're left-handed, you start from the right and you work for the left, focusing on the left endpoint. So I will create these. So this kind of gives you some practice, right? If you focus on that endpoint, you should be able to make fairly straight lines. Okay, a little rough up here early on, okay? Mainly because I wasn't focusing on my endpoint. I have a tendency to focus on the end of the lead, but the lines got better as I went. So keep that in mind. The more you practice, the better off you are. All right, let's move to the next line type. So the next line type is called a construction line. And construction lines provide a light layout for the object and drawing. Okay, so we'll write that down. Provide a light layout for the object. Okay, the object is the thing that we're trying to draw, and drawing as a whole. Okay, hopefully you can read that okay. All right, so line weight, if you look at the line, this is a thin line and it's also a light line. So what we're going to say is that it is thin and light. Okay, but because of its purpose, and I think I mentioned construction lines to you a little bit in the techniques portion or video that I'd previously recorded. So lead size is 0.5, smaller, thinner line, smaller lead. All right, so to make these lines, it's all about pressure. So we applied a bit of pressure over here in creating the visible lines, but we don't need all that pressure in creating the construction lines. So again, focus on your endpoint and draw lines. And what I do is I back my hand off of the endpoint of the pencil. So if I have it close, I can apply more pressure. The further I take my hand away from the endpoint of the pencil, the less pressure I end up applying to it. Okay, so be consistent and be light as you make these lines. All right, you'll get better at them as you create them. But these are lines that are very important for you guys to get right. All right, moving on to the next line type, it is hidden lines. Okay, and hidden lines represent hidden edges of an object. Okay, so if we look up here at the actual line, the hidden line, notice that it's made of dashes and spaces, or just made of dashes, because if it's got dashes, it has spaces intuitively. All right, and so we're going to make that in just a moment. Looking at its line weight, though, you can see it's a bit thinner than the visible line over here to our left. So we would consider this a thin line. All right. However, it is dark, unlike the construction line, which is light. So since this is a thin line, then the obvious pencil size is 0.5. All right, so let's create this. Now, to line up dashes in such a straight line, it's very difficult to do. So what I do to aid in that process is I use a construction line. So I'll go down through here and create some construction lines pretty quickly, and use those construction lines to guide my application of those dashes. All right, I'm not going to do any erasing. Keep your construction line light so that the dashes kind of pop off the page to represent the hidden line. This is a tedious line, and by that I mean that with the detail of the dashes, it takes time and effort more than most of the other lines. You want to try to be consistent with your dashes. They are, in terms of size, the same size as a letter. If you remember when we talked about lettering, which we'll mention in just a few moments, lettering is 1/8 of an inch, so these dashes are also 1/8 of an inch in length. Okay, now what's important is to be as consistent as you can. Obviously, they're going to vary a little bit, but the more consistent you can be, the better it looks, the better it communicates. And that's, remember, what the purpose of sketching is. All right, moving on to the next line type. So the next line type is center lines. And center lines represent the center and axes for arcs and circles, and also shows symmetry for an object. So hopefully I can fit all that information in here. So it represents the center and axes, okay? Axes being plural for axis, for arcs and circles. So I use the and symbol instead. I'm going to run out of space here. And shows symmetry of an object. Okay. All right, that was a lot. So looking at a center line, if you notice, again, it's a bit like a hidden line in that it's got some dashing going on. It's also thin but dark. So line weight is thin and dark. Therefore, the lead size is 0.5. Okay, so far most of our lead sizes have been 0.5. All right, so again, like the hidden line, what we want to do is we want to come across to here with some quick construction lines. That one's a bit skewed. So focus on the end point. Trust yourself that you can get the line there as straight as possible. And then go over that line. I'll kind of miss it a little bit. But go over that line with the symbol for a center line, which is a long line, dash, long line, dash, long line. Okay? It typically ends with the long lines. The dashes are in between. Okay? Again, these lines are just to communicate what is happening within a drawing of an object. And so if you know what they're to represent, then it makes sense when they're applied. And so you will begin to see that when we begin drawing objects this coming week. So in creating these different types of lines, you're learning also how to understand or read a drawing. Okay? All right. Now, if you're using a mechanical pencil, certainly, if you had lead sizes of each of these sizes, 0.5, 0.7, 0.9, you could certainly use it and you would see the difference. I'm using a wooden pencil, so I'm not getting that variation. I'm not as much concerned about the variation in thickness as I am concerned about the variation in line weight. Okay? All right, moving on to our next type of line, which is the border line. Border lines provide a frame for the drawing space of an object. Okay? And if you look at the border line, you can see that it's a bit thicker than the other lines we had previously drawn. If you want to compare it, best comparison is to a visible line. It looks a whole lot like a visible line, but if you notice, it's a bit thicker than a visible line. So since it's thicker than a visible line, and a visible line is considered thick, then we'll say that it is very thick and dark. Okay, so very thick and dark. Therefore, the lead size, since a visible line is 0.7, then this would be the 0.9. Okay, lead size. And those 0.5, 0.7, 0.9 are in millimeters, okay, in terms of size. All right, so again, certainly to get that thickness, we could trace or use a duller pencil. I'm not worried about the thickness so much as I'm concerned about, one, that you're working on creating straight lines, and two, that you're consistent with your line weight. And that takes us to our next line type, which are dimension lines, or is a dimension line, okay? A dimension line, if you notice, it's a bit interesting compared to the other lines in that it actually has text inside of it, and that text represents a distance or measurement, and it's got arrows on the ends. And so what a dimension line actually does is provides size information of an object. Okay, so if you notice the line weight, if you compare it to some of the other lines that you've drawn, like the hidden line and the center line, you can see it's pretty similar to that in terms of line weight. So this line is a thin and dark line, okay, in terms of line weight. Lead size, therefore, is 0.5. So most of our lines are 0.5, use a lead size of 0.5, okay? All right, to create this line, again, you could certainly use, and I'd use construction lines just to kind of keep it consistent. As long as you keep your construction line straight, this line will be straight. So I put construction lines in there, and that just aids me in being able to draw this line more effectively. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just draw the line, create the gap, and instead of doing them all at the same time, I'll just do the same portion at the same time. And we'll put in a different value just to simplify it for ourselves. Again, this line's a bit tedious too, like the hidden and the center lines. Okay, I haven't drawn them. You'll be able to recognize them when you see them. I'll go ahead and put arrowheads on this side. Arrowheads are very small. Want to be, somewhat consistent with them. Keep them very tight. Struggling a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to put the number 3 in here. You can choose another number if you want to. I'm just going to choose the number 3. And it should be about 1/8 of an inch in height, okay? And you can see that that's fairly consistent with the height of the number 2.88, okay? So that's the dimension line, which provides the size information of an object, all right? Moving on to the final line type is, it is a guideline, okay? Guidelines aid in controlling the height of lettering. Spell height correctly. Okay, so lettering we've talked about. We know that lettering height is 1/8 of an inch, as we referred to earlier in the video. So guidelines, if you notice where it's pointing to these lines in this title block. Remember mentioning the title block. Title block is where you have name and information, about the drawing itself. So notice that those are a lot like the construction lines. So they are thin and light, okay? They look exactly like a construction line, but they serve a different purpose. And their purpose, so 0.5 for the lead size, their purpose is to control the height of lettering. So we already have them in place, so we don't have to draw these. What we want to do is apply our lettering. So remember that lettering is vertical uppercase Gothic lettering. So what we want to do is we want to put our name in here. And my pencil's a bit dull, so it may seem like that information is kind of running together a little bit. But just watch your space and be sure that your lettering is uniform. Okay, you want your first and last name. The school is already in there in CHS. Your title, this is your title, hence why it's called a title block, is already located in there as well. So we want to kind of pan over and put your period in. So maybe, I'm going to put period 2 because I don't have a period 2 this semester. And our date is 9/11. 2000, so I went ahead and put that, or 2020, so I went ahead and put the 20 in there. And then our scale's already provided and our drawing number's provided. So now you've walked through the creation of developing line types that we will be using in the future to create the various objects that you guys will create. And so using these line types will help someone understand what you're trying to communicate to them. These are communication tools, ways to code a drawing. So if you were not able to print out this sheet and create what I just created on this sheet, the alternative is that you can put it on a grid sheet. And how that would look is something like this, okay? So maybe a little bit more work initially involved, but you can see how I did that layout. Now I did mess up down here and didn't allow myself much space for talking about guidelines, but you can see that information right there. This information will be quiz and test worthy, as well as application worthy. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Make sure you know the line types, how they're defined, and what their line weight and lead size is. Okay, and to be able to identify them. Okay, so for any further questions, we'll address that coming up next week, and we'll begin to apply these to an object. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.